The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, presented by DraftKings 2021 Fantasy Football Rankings Top 150 Part 2. We're going to start at 50 and go our way up to 100, and my guest today might be able to talk me in or out of some players and where they stand inside the entire top 150. I already did part 1 through 50 overall with Jake Seeley. You can find that up on Mayo Media Network. Subscribe today, by the way, to the YouTube channel. Just hit the description. You're going to find it down there. As you will find a cash giveaway. You want to win 100 or hundreds of dollars? Well, if you're the lucky one who gets their name drawn out, then you most definitely will. So what you need to do is hit that description. There's a brand new show on Mayo Media Network. It's called Fantasy Football Picks and Bets. It's already launched. You can go check out episode 1 now. It's going to be twice a week for a while, then 3 times a week. Then in season, it's going to be 5 or 6 times a week to meet all of your fantasy football season long DraftKings and betting needs. It's going to be a lot of fun. So what I recommend that you do is hit that description. There is a giveaway in the Apple review section. You leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, something you enjoy about the show. You can make it up. I don't give a shit. And then you can say Twitter handle or email address so I know where to contact you if you are a winner. We're going to be giving away those winners in the beginning of August. So please support Mayo Media Network and go check that out right now. Subscribe to the new podcast, Fantasy Football Picks and Bets. You're going to be surprised the amount of talent coming in on this show on a weekly basis. It's going to be terrific news. You can also find the full top 150 in the description and on DraftKings Playbook right now as well. Remember to smash the like button for the video, and you tell me which player that you are really high on from this 50, from beyond 50, like after the 4th round in fantasy football drafts this year. Who's the guy that you have to take on your team? No questions asked. I'll reach 3 rounds on this guy because I got to have him. I want to know who those popular players are, at least in your mind right now, entering the 2021 fantasy football season. And the big thing that you need to do, because it's free to use right now, and season long is going to be free all year long, but you need to go to runthesims.com. Season long, daily fantasy, sports betting, an optimizer, projections, sports betting tools. It's all up there. It is a tools and stats site. And it's free to use till the end of July. So if you just go make a free account, find that down in the description as well at runthesims.com. However, it's going to be, if you're going to get into the optimizer game or the sports betting game in terms of tools to help you succeed, it's going to cost money. So what you should do is go to runthesims.com/Mayo. There is the early bird special on right now. You can get the founder's rate before August 1st. You lock that in like the NWO for life. All right. Justin Freeman, my partner at runthesims.com, is on the line with me right now. I think you're giving away too much money here, Justin. I mean, locking in the same rate for life, that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's something we want to do to be able to reward people who jump on this early. Obviously, that's a good situation for everybody involved. And, you obviously have been down this road before with Fantasy National, and I think it's a good way to reward people who hop in early. And so we're happy to do it. I think people have really loved the site who've hopped on already. So we're kind of hitting the rocket ship season right now and rolling on. Like it's people are already starting to report to camp here for NFL. Like that's this week. And so all the news and storylines are going to come in. Projections are going to be updated constantly. So it should be a lot of fun this season.
Yeah, so go give it a test drive right now. Runthesims.com. Maybe it's not for you, but it probably is going to be for you if you care about the NFL. And even check out the Advanced Stats Hub as well if you want to break down like week by week, target shares, market shares. All of that information is up there and super customizable for you. So just wanted to let you in on the secret. So runthesims.com and /Mayo to get that discount founder's rate if you want it right now after you go check it out. So I want to talk about my rankings. I already went through the very top end of the rankings. That's, people somewhat agree. Some people don't agree. But if you're drafting in a season-long format, Justin, like what are some things that you're wanting to do? Like, are you someone who doesn't care that like, hey, it's the 4th round, I'll take a quarterback? Are you still firmly on, hey, 10th round and above is where I want to get my quarterback?
Yeah, I definitely still buy into late round quarterback. I do think people are getting a little bit smarter at nailing down some of those values too. Like that's an important thing to remember, that as that quarterback market becomes a bit more efficient, we should probably be a little bit more willing to take those guys where their ADP is going. But I still think there's guys that are going late in your draft. Like I know the late round quarterback, JJ Zacharyson, always preaches that, late round quarterback's not a strategy of playing chicken. Like you don't want to be necessarily the last guy guy holding the bag for quarterback. But even if you get into that situation in a one quarterback league, that's not such a bad place to be. There's lots of good quarterbacks available late, but I'd say sort of that sweet spot to me is like, I want to be targeting guys in the 8th, 9th, 10th rounds, you know, getting your guys like Jalen Hurts or a Joe Burrow, somebody who, you know, has a really strong ceiling. And those guys kind of for different reasons. Like we saw immense pass volume with Burrow last year. We saw incredible rushing volume for Jalen Hurts last year. A lot of different ways to get to the same number of fantasy points, which is ultimately what we're after. Chase offenses who have a little bit of ceiling and maybe just a little bit of ambiguity there at the quarterback position.
Well, I want to talk to you about those Cincinnati Bengals and Joe Burrow in particular, because you're the one who's providing the projections, the baseline projections at runthesims.com. And I want to take a look at your projections for the Cincinnati Bengals. And we can see that, you know, you have Joe Burrow projected as QB number 11. And we take a look at this. And one of the great things about the site is you can go customize everything you want. You think Justin's a jamoke, like, oh, to 1,066.8 plays, please give me 1,100 plays. But this is a very optimistic pass rate for this team. Like you have them passing 61% of the time, rushing 39% of the time. And if that's the case, and they do pass over 60% of the time, they could feasibly, with no like legit tight end that we know is going to soak up a lot of the targets. Now we're looking at a situation where all three of these receivers could end up being top 30 options, or it breaks a different way and one of the receivers ends up being like a fringe top 10 option. One guy kind of falls by the wayside, and one guy's firmly in between. How do you see this team shaking out?
Yeah, I think the most likely scenarios, we do get a pretty even distribution of targets between that big three. We've got Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd, and they're all going to get targets for sort of different reasons. But I think if any of them has an opportunity to pull ahead and become like the alpha dog, it's going to be Jamar Chase. This dude may be the best wide receiver prospect that we've seen, you know, in 5 or so years. Like he's phenomenal. Sat out his entire junior season last year because he was a freaking stud as a sophomore and didn't want to blow it. And so he took the locked in guarantee of being a top 5 pick, going to the Bengals. And I think they're going to feed him aggressively. That's not taking anything away from Tyler Boyd, who he's going to soak up targets for different reasons as the chain mover in that offense. And T. Higgins, a guy who, you know, maybe the expectations aren't as high as what we have for Jamar Chase, but T. Higgins had a great year last year as well. I think we'll start off seeing Jamar Chase sort of have to earn his way up in that offense, but by week 4 or 5, I expect him to be the clear alpha. And if there's anybody who's going to do what Justin Jefferson did this year, I think it's going to be Jamar Chase.
So of the rookies, how terrified are you? Because the projections have him out as wide receiver number 14. In my overall rankings, he is number 41 overall. That's between Robert Woods, and I actually have him ahead of CeeDee Lamb at this point, which I know is going to be a very controversial opinion because everyone loves CeeDee Lamb. The way that I'm drafting, I'm just going to take Michael Gallup late and go with that and hope that Cooper is still, you know, potentially the number one. They're all basically the situation that you've kind of laid out with the Bengals, I think could happen in Dallas, where all three of them are pretty viable. So give me the value guy a little bit later. The thing with Jamar Chase right now is, yes, he is being drafted as the highest of the Bengals wide receivers, but it's not so, the cost hasn't become prohibitive yet, where it has with CeeDee Lamb. Like, you really need to go reach on CeeDee Lamb if you want him on your team. And I don't see a huge distinction between them. Yes, CeeDee Lamb can go out and just grab the number one job in Dallas and end up being by far the best fantasy receiver and real life receiver on that team. But I see the same path for Jamar Chase, and the cost is much better for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're talking about a 6th round ADP for Jamar Chase and a guy with just as much upside as anybody. I mean, one of the things we really love about that Cowboys offense is the pace. Like they run a ton of plays, and obviously Dak's a capable passer, and that's exactly what we're seeing in Cincinnati as well. A capable passer with a ton of pass volume, and we just want more and more shots on goal, right? Like that's what we want. We want, if you take an offense, a passing offense that has 40 targets to go around in a game versus one that has 30 targets to go around. Like simple math tells you that a 20% target share in each of those offenses is not the same. So we want to target that Cincy offense. I'm a big believer in it. And obviously people are buying into Joe Mixon this year as well in that offense, because of the fact that they do project to be one of the more higher scoring teams in the league. They have been rebuilding for, I don't know what, decades. And now they actually have a really strong team. So excited to see what they can put together this year, but love that price point on Jamar Chase.
So CeeDee Lamb is being drafted right now in the NFC High Stakes League season-long drafts at number 13 at wide receiver. That's pick number 33 overall. So that's a third-round pick. That's the cost for CeeDee Lamb right now. He's going ahead of Amari Cooper, who is number 16. And I understand the case for it, but at some point you're buying the ceiling of a player, and maybe people think that he's going to be the number one receiver this year. I suppose in that Dallas offense, that's not out of the range of outcomes. It's just not where I would have him projected out. That's more than I'm willing to buy. And then I look at Chase. Chase is still being drafted as the number 23 receiver overall and pick number 55. So you have CeeDee Lamb, who's going in between Allen Robinson and Mike Evans, or Jamar Chase, who's going in between Tyler Lockett and Adam Thielen. T. Higgins is going at number 25. So it seems like if you want to shoot for the upside, that Jamar Chase would be the pick here. And like, as you kind of pointed out, that if you just want a safe, reliable player who still has upside, if he factors into this offense more than people think, Tyler Boyd is probably the pick.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing wrong with that. And I think, the classic slot guy gets a lot of bad rap, whether it be DFS, best ball season long, whatever, like it's not super sexy to own Tyler Boyd on your roster, but a guy that consistently gets points and can produce for your lineup has a lot of value. And let's not sleep on the fact that, monster weeks are indeed tied to opportunities, and having more and more shots at being able to put together those monster weeks helps a guy like Tyler Boyd. So don't sleep on a guy just because he's don't slot shame, right?
Yeah, don't slot shame in this situation. The guy that he's going around, like someone like Will Fuller and Tyler Boyd have very similar ADPs right now. I think in my mind, I'm drawn to the allure of Will Fuller. I know he's going to miss the first game of the season, and everyone's so down on that Miami offense. Like, Tua sucks. He's not going to be able to do anything. But these are real weapons that he has in place right now. And it strikes me as odd for a player that the fantasy community loves as much as Will Fuller, by and large, like, oh my God. And maybe they just want him on DraftKings week to week or in best ball formats, maybe not so much season long because of his unpredictable nature. But in this offense, he could be the wide receiver one and be really good.
Yeah, exactly. Well, even if he's not the wide receiver one, he's going to very rarely come off the field. He and Devontae Parker are going to be staples out there, along with Mike Gesicki at tight end. You'll see some other guys mix in for that, number 3 role. But overall, I think you can project a lot of consistency there for Will Fuller. Now, one of my least favorite things, to hear people say as a negative on a player is injury prone, but that always comes up with Will Fuller. And maybe it's the old high performance racing engine analogy here, where he's just always in the shot because of how fast the guy moves, but truly explosive guy. And we've seen this before with quarterbacks and coaching staffs. The Dolphins, another team who has been rebuilding for several years, they have sort of lined the planets up so that they have a ton of draft capital that they've invested along the line, and then along the skill position players as well, to put Tua in a place where he can succeed. So, being able to throw, even at worst, jump balls to Will Fuller and Devontae Parker is a pretty enviable situation. And Mike Gesicki, a guy that can jump out of the gym too. So I think they've put Tua in a place where he can succeed. They've obviously eliminated Ryan Fitzpatrick from the situation, so they can focus. Like, he doesn't have to look over his shoulder all season long. He can just go in there, play quarterback. And I think Tua has obviously the legs to keep the chains moving on first down. And I think that's sort of an underrated part of fantasy football in general, is like, do you have a team that can move the chains? Like, forget about scoring upside. Scoring upside will come when you have multiple ways to achieve first downs. And to me, the Dolphins have set themselves up in a big way to be able to convert on, third and any distance. And so I like them to be a big rebounder this year.
What do you make of their backfield? Because Myles Gaskin appears like, if he is the running back 1 and he's going to get 75% of the snaps. He's being massively underdrafted at this point, but everyone just kind of like, yeah, I don't really know what's going on with Myles Gaskin. Is Salvin Ahmed going to take a shot here in this backfield, or one of the like myriad guys that they've signed in the offseason going to come in? So that either like, there's a couple guys like this at running back, like Mike Davis is one of them. Myles Gaskin is another. Kareem Hunt, I guess you could throw in that boat because they're all going around the same spot. Like the difference between Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette at that point too. Like, do you have any faith in any of these guys? Because I'm not going to lie to you, I looked at the projections. They love Mike Davis, Justin.
They do. And matter of fact, Myles Gaskin and Mike Davis, two guys whose projection I actually updated this morning. So I am aware of both of those guys. To me, Gaskin is a guy who he actually makes for a fantastic use case in the projection builder, because we think that he has a wide range of outcomes. There's a lot of ways this backfield can go. Myles Gaskin could absolutely take over there and like end up with a 60% rushing market share. It's possible. It could be a complete mix, backfield with either Ahmed or Malcolm Brown. Like Malcolm Brown's actually the guy that I tweaked up a little bit today, because the reports seem to be indicating that he may be the number 2 and not Ahmed. So we'll keep an eye on that situation as well. But, Gaskin came in, played well last year, but there's not a long track record either. So, it's a very different situation than some of those other guys. Even comparing to Mike Davis, we think about at least the Falcons did something that showed us that they were interested in featuring Mike Davis. They went out and got him in free agency, let Ito Smith go, let Brian Hill go. It's just Mike Davis and some undrafted free agents hanging around. So I think you can feel much more solid about projecting Mike Davis for volume than you can for Myles Gaskin, because we have not seen sustained usage from Myles Gaskin.
So for me, like right now, running back 15 is where you have Mike Davis. I have Mike Davis at number 47 overall in the rankings. That's one spot behind Kyler Murray. And I actually bumped him up a spot ahead of Chris Carson. So I'm a bit of a believer. But when you look at his ADP right now, where's Mike Davis finally going? Has he settled yet? No, he's still going around pick number 60. That's after Kareem Hunt. Like, I get that Kareem Hunt's probably a better football player than Mike Davis, but he's just not going to have that same potential opportunity. Like, this just becomes Mike Davis's job all year long. Essentially, he's just in the Todd Gurley role from last year, but catches a few more passes. Like, Todd Gurley was horrible last year on the Falcons and was still like a top 20 running back.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, somebody has to score the rushing touchdowns in the offense. And, whether or not Kareem Hunt's a better, more talented runner than Mike Davis, I'd agree. Mike Davis is probably just a journeyman guy. But who really cares? Like the goal of fantasy football is not to figure out who are the best players, who has the most talent, who's going to be the most, efficient in success rate or expected points added or whatever. Like, we don't care about that. We care about production, and production comes through volume, especially at the running back position. So just give me the guy who's going to be locked into the lead back role. Like, I don't see, when I look at the rest of that roster, anybody who's going to threaten Mike Davis for lead back duties.
So you're just not buying the talent of Quadre Olison, or that this is finally the team that unlocks Cordero Patterson?
Yeah, no, I'm not buying into it. I do think Patterson will get his token rushes per game, but overall, like, no, and I'm intrigued by the Falcons offense in general. Like, I think Calvin Ridley's one of my favorite players to draft this season, because I think he actually has a chance to be the wide receiver 1 with Julio Jones out of town. When you look at the splits back and forth with Julio on the field and Julio off the field, Calvin Ridley is just an absolute target monster and continues to be efficient. So sometimes what we see is that these wide receivers, when the alpha wide receiver is out, the number 2 wide receiver can't step in and handle the double coverage and the extra shadow treatment and that sort of thing. But not a problem for Calvin Ridley, a talented dude in his own right. And the Falcons figured to be passing a lot because their defense still has a lot of holes in it. They'll be playing catch up all year. That sounds good for Calvin Ridley to me.
So just looking at my rankings, I have Davis over Myles Gaskin and Kareem Hunt. That is not the way that they've been drafted over the past 3 weeks, though. And this is from a sample of 94 high-stakes drafts. It's going... Well, actually, Javonte Williams is going at pick number 52 ahead of all of them. Then it's Myles Gaskin, then Kareem Hunt, then Mike Davis. James Robinson is also on this tier too. Do you have any feel for James Robinson? Because I don't feel like he's on... I mean, he could most definitely be on these guys' tier for this season, depending on how Jacksonville shakes out. I just don't know if I'm comfortable drafting him around all of these other guys who... we could have our doubts about the talent of some of these guys, but it just seems like their path to upside is a lot clearer.
Yeah, I don't get it with James Robinson. He's a guy who to me looks like he's about 4 rounds overpriced. Like I think he's just completely out of left field with where his ADP is. And I don't understand the upside case for him. To me, he's maybe a high-end handcuff type because we know Travis Etienne was drafted to be the starting running back of this team. So we want a backup running back from the Jaguars. Like I don't understand where we're coming from on that. Now, granted, there were the reports that Travis Etienne would be involved as more of this like slot wide receiver, hybrid type role. And then maybe you get 2 running backs on the field. But I'll tell you, anytime I've ever heard the like, we'll play 2 running backs at the same time theory, it never works out all season.
No, I have James Robinson ranked number 95 overall in the rankings, and he's on the running back tier for me with Gus Edwards, Kenyon Drake, Damien Harris, who I might actually be bumping up right now. Maybe we'll talk through that a little bit. Melvin Gordon, Trey Sermon, A.J. Dillon, Latavius Murray, James Conner, Tony Pollard, Jamal Williams, Alexander Madison. Like, he's on the tier of if other guy gets hurt, then he'll be good. If not, probably not going to be good.
Yeah, which is basically what had to happen last year. It wasn't that somebody got hurt. It was that Leonard Fournette got shipped out of town and left a wide open hole thanks to something that nobody could have really foreseen, this whole falling out or whatever and Fournette getting cut. But, Robinson just happened to be right place at the right time. And now he's at the wrong place at the wrong time. So no need to draft him in the mid rounds.
So I want to jump over to the projections for a second for Miami in particular, because I want us to build a case customizably for Myles Gaskin here. So in the projections, you have the rushing rate for the Dolphins at 43%. I think that's probably pretty accurate. They're probably going to be a team that runs the most in the NFL. And this is the cool thing about runthesims.com. You don't agree with the projections, just modify them. It's super easy. Then there's a save button. So when you come back, you can figure it out. So 44% rushing share for Myles Gaskin, 22% for Salvon Ahmed, 11% for Malcolm Brown, and 2 at 15% actually seems a bit high for me. So I think let's just make a case that Myles Gaskin is the lead running back and see what that does to his projection. So if, let's say we bump him up to 60% of the rushing share. So I'll go over there. We want to go to 60. That means we have to find places to bump other people out. So we'll put Tua down to 10. And we'll put Ahmed down to 11% and see what that does. Not 111%, 11%. So now we see that Gaskin is bumped all the way up to running back number 19. And when we take a look at his ADP, you're going to find that Gaskin is number 57 overall. That would start to make a lot more sense, wouldn't it? If we think that he's going to be the lead back. But I think that does showcase that even if he is the lead back in this particular offense, it might not be the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah, right. So what we've done is we've made an assumption that may or may not be true. And now by hitting the best case scenario of that assumption, he pays off at ADP. And we want guys that can pay off at ADP even when things don't break perfectly. So we want to focus on other guys in that range, in my opinion. And, there's been a lot of talk around the industry lately about the running back dead zone and those middle rounds and how, we can tend to make assumptions that tend to be false. And to me, Myles Gaskin, a perfect example of like, let's not over project this role. Let's understand that this is a pretty fragile situation. Like, would it surprise anybody if Malcolm Brown was the guy that got 50% of the rushes in this offense? Like, who knows? Like, they don't owe anything to any of these guys. So to me, the door is completely wide open.
So I even just updated the projections right now. I took all of the market share of targets away from Salvon Ahmed and put them just on. I decreased the 5% market share from Ahmed and put them on to Myles Gaskin. So now that gives him a 60% rushing market share and a 14% market share of the targets. And it still only gets him up to running back number 14. So it's just going to be tough sledding in this offense. Half point PPR, that's 244 points. That's a really good season. You would want to have that guy on your team, no doubt. But I feel like we're almost up to a ceiling projection at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So be careful how many assumptions it takes for your guy to actually, be able to pop and be usable for you week in, week out. And obviously, as the draft goes on, you can afford to make a few more of those assumptions. The investment that you're making is less. So overall, like just good example of a player who doesn't have enough of a solid baseline to justify going, anywhere in the fourth, fifth round.
Yeah, so I want to jump back to Cincinnati for a second and look at those projections like I was talking about with Jamar Chase. So if we kind of take into consideration what's going on here, right now he's projected as a 21% market share, Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins. And I think this is the best way, this is how I really like to use the projections is, I'm really high on this one guy. What does he actually have to do in order for him to hit this ceiling of where I want to draft him? Like the year that I had Mike Evans inside the top 10 overall. I mean, that was years ago now. The assumption was he is the only guy who's going to catch passes on this team. He's going to have like a 33% market share. So then I went in and changed him to a 33% market share and figured that was his upside just to see what would happen. And it was like, oh yeah, he'd be like a top 3 receiver if this happened. And that's what ended up happening. My assumption was right. Now, my assumption on a lot of guys tends to be really wrong, but at least now I can figure out like, can Jamar Chase be the number 1 fantasy wide receiver? It's like, I suppose he could, if everything, and he got like 20 touchdowns or something like that. But what would he actually need to do to get into this conversation? So I want to change his projection just a little bit to see what happens here. If we want to make an assumption, let's say that Jamar Chase is going to be sort of the target monster on this team over the other two. So that slightly takes away with him. How can we adjust the projections to see what more of his upside is? So right now he's at 21%. What if we just bumped him up? Let's say he gets 25% of the target market share and we just take 2% away from the other guys. Does that work for you, Justin?
Yeah, sure. Let's just give that a shot. And to me, that's completely within the range of outcomes for him.
Yeah, it's not like 50% market share or something like that. All of a sudden, it's just a 4% increase from 21% to 25% in this offense. That bumps him up to wide receiver 8 overall. Now,
let's do one.
Okay,
let's do one more thing while we're here, Pat, and talk about his touchdown rate, which is currently listed at 17% of the team's receiving touchdowns. And so we think that's probably going to be a little low if he's getting 25% of the targets. Like a good Jamar Chase could easily, beat the 25% in touchdown market share. So let's bump that up to about 30% and now see what happens. Now we've got 30% of those passing touchdowns of that offense funneling through Jamar Chase, which to me makes sense in a situation where he is getting a quarter of the targets. And now you make those two changes. We bumped up his target share just a little bit and his touchdown market share to 30%. He's all of a sudden the wide receiver 3 overall.
Yeah, so that would have 322 PPR points, 269. So at the bottom of the screen here under target touchdown market share, it's listed at 102%. Is that okay for the projections?
Yeah, no, we obviously, if we're going to add a little bit to Jamar Chase, we need to take away a little bit from some of the other guys. The question that column is asking is, we are implying a certain number of receiving touchdowns in this offense. Who's going to get those touchdowns? And so we're farming those touchdowns out. We think Jamar Chase is going to get 30% of those. And that means that, some of those other guys are going to get a little bit less than what we have projected. So, maybe we bump Tyler Boyd down to 15, maybe T. Higgins to 17, yada, yada. So you can play with these and massage these. That's kind of the fun part to me is like, you'll kind of get a sense of how top-down volume projections work, because you start with assuming what the team is going to do and then assuming that every player gets some slice of that pie cut up a little bit differently. And so go in there and make sure all your numbers add up to 100 and you've got some sort of viable projection.
Yeah, and that's the way that I kind of look at it. Like, I think that is not an unrealistic season for Jamar Chase. It's probably like the 97th percentile outcome for him and most likely not to happen. But I don't think that path is unrealistic at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing to keep in mind is like, okay, this is maybe best case scenario for Jamar Chase. And we're still ranking him against like most likely scenario for every other receiver. So sure, we could go in and publish best case scenario for every wide receiver, and Jamar Chase's best case scenario would start to dip backwards a little bit. Like, he's still probably falling behind here, I would guess, Tyreek Hill and maybe an Aaron Rodgers led Devontae Adams or somebody kind of like that in this situation. So, those guys obviously have ceilings that eclipse what we're projecting them for. So just keep in mind.
Let's go take a look. Let's go take a look how he is at wide receiver now. So we've updated it. Jamar Chase, I bumped him down to a 28% touchdown share. So that makes him wide receiver number 5 overall. But when you look at his numbers up against everyone, he ends up leading the league in yardage. Obviously, that the targets aren't going to be quite as high as a Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Stefan Diggs, and Calvin Ridley, and sort of their baseline projection. But that puts him on, like you said, the Justin Jefferson type level of where we have him, Michael Thomas, A.J. Brown. And that's not inconceivable if you really think about how this offense works. Now, if you think it's more of like a Drew Brees communist offense where everyone has to get their share, then maybe that doesn't work out and all 3 of them are sort of in the 20s. But if you can factor 1 or 2 of the guys out and say, hey, there's a reason they went out and got Chase. He's the alpha. He's who you need to go get. He would become like when I spoke about a bit earlier and said in the comment section, give me one of your reach players. I think he's going to be a bit of a reach player for me. And he falls in that, like, I mean, if you take him in the 5th round, you can take him in the 5th round. That's fine. Like, he's going in like the early 6th round, so a reach of a round, maybe even late 4th. I don't really see that big of a problem with it because, as you mentioned, there's that dead zone for running backs where like legit Mike Davis and David Montgomery are like the guys that you want. That's not really inspiring.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, take a guy with immense upside. And Pat, do you recall, let's see, it's been 2 years now since Jamar Chase has played football. Who was his quarterback back then at LSU?
I believe it was a guy who blew out his knee at some point last year.
That'd be Mr. Joe Burrow, indeed. Yeah, so we get to reunite this LSU connection up in Ohio. So yeah, I think I'm digging the narratives, man. I'm digging the narratives, and I love the way that the projections just sort of independently love Jamar Chase.
So how do you go about creating these projections? I'm really curious about that. I think that people like to know that because there are some people who develop their own projections. They have giant Excel sheets. One of the reasons that Run the Sims exists is because people like me who are bad at math and can't do any programming, like this is easy for me to figure out. I just go and type in numbers and it updates for me. That was one of the big things about Fantasy Nationals. Like, oh, I don't know how to collect all this data myself. Here it's all collected for me, and it's super customizable for me to tell the story that I want it to tell. That's really the hook, line, and sinker of this site, is that you get to customize everything. But when you're setting the baseline projections, how do you come up with that?
Yeah, exactly. So we do try to, just like Fantasy National, try to control the number of knobs and levers that people can turn and make that as easy as possible. And so, yeah, there is a little bit of art and a little bit of science involved in creating NFL projections. I think maybe for some other sports, you get away with maybe a true scientific approach, but in the NFL, you're constantly dealing with rumors and news and injuries and depth chart shuffles and all of these things that it would be very tough to programmatically do. So the volume numbers in an offense, I don't know any way to do it other than to go in and plug those in manually. And that means that what you'd be seeing as a baseline here is sort of my default, like what I think is going to happen. And so what I think is going to happen may mean something, but it's not certainly everything. And, feel free to go in there and tweak it yourself. So the volume stuff is very, very much feel based. But the efficiency stuff, and when I say efficiency, I'm talking about what do we expect that person to do with that volume? What do we expect Mike Davis to do when we do give him 200 carries? Does that turn into 800 yards or 1,000 yards, for example? That's a little bit more scientific. We can look back on historical data, for what running backs tend to do at that age, in new situations based on this former career numbers, and then sort of project that out for the year. And so I think if you just sort of trusted the numbers related to, yards per carry, yards per reception, catch rate, some of those things we have programmatically in there, I think you're going to find that they're pretty close to predictable. The only thing that's not predictable is the volume. So go in there and tweak around and, make somebody else the RB1 out of nowhere, simulate out the season that happens when, some starting running back gets hurt in camp and now the backup is the starter all year long. So there's a lot of different things you can do to plug with it, but it is very much a feel-based thing. And, I do this for preseason, but also for every week in season for our DFS projections too. And it's just kind of a constant shuffle and monitoring of the news, a lot of push alert notifications on the phone to make sure we don't miss anything. So it's a lot going on in season.
So when you're able to customize, and that's what I want to do with the Patriots right now, because it does seem like there is a case that Damien Harris just might be the guy in New England. I don't want to trust that. I don't want to bake that in and be like, oh yeah, he's going to get 80% of the rushes. But I think the biggest conundrum for his fantasy outlook for the year comes down to who's starting at quarterback. What do you make of Newton versus Mac Jones and how long that's going to last?
Yeah, I think the Patriots, if they're being honest with themselves, they know they're not winning a Super Bowl this year, and it really probably doesn't matter who the quarterback is. They're not going to be a hyper competitive team, I don't think. However, it's time to go ahead and start getting Mac Jones his looks. So I kind of foresee this being a short hook for Cam Newton. I would bet he opens up the season as the week 1 starter, but maybe by week 5, we're seeing Mac Jones come into the picture. I mean, let's be real. Everybody knows when you draft a quarterback in the first round that it's just a matter of time, with maybe a rare exception like the Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers deal. So yeah, Mac Jones, I think, will be the starter under center by week 5. And that should really, really help Damien Harris, because Damien Harris, a guy who is going to need touchdown equity to pay off. And Cam Newton sucks the lifeblood out of the rushing offense, wherever he goes, because he's the goal line back. You can march it all the way up and down the field. You could have some great yardage games, but he is going to be the guy inside the 5 to try to punch it in. And rightfully so. He's excellent at it. So yeah, I think that's a really scary situation, as like a Cam Newton starts all season long if you're drafting Damien Harris. But I think we can project 3/4 of this season with Mac Jones, and that means Damien Harris could be an actual league winner for you by the time the playoff stretch comes along.
Well, let's update the Patriots projections to try to create that scenario of where Damien Harris could be if Mac Jones is the starter after a few games. So right now we have him at a 44.9% TD market share. I had previously bumped up Cam Newton to a 19%, but let's say he only starts 3 games or something like that. Probably still giving him like a 9%. It seems about right for the amount that he's going to do this season. Mac Jones will have right around 5%. I bumped down Sony Michel, but let's live in a world where Sony Michel kind of goes away. Like, do we think that Sony Michel is really going to have that big of an impact this year? Like, he could get cut before the season starts, right?
Absolutely could get cut this year. And Damien Harris, a guy who would then, if Sony Michel's not around, take over like almost the entirety of the rushing touchdown expectation on that team.
Well, let's just bump Stevenson up. Let's put Stevenson at 11% of the market share of rushes. We're going to we'll put Sony down to 0%, and then we'll bump up. Let's see here. Oh, how can I do this? 60% for Damien Harris. What are we looking at right now? So that's right around. We'll even put Stevenson at 13% to see what happens. And then we'll take away we'll bump up Stevenson to around 10%. That's 310%. That's probably not going to work out. And then just put Damien Harris at an even 50% and see what happens then. All of a sudden, he's up to running back 20. And you'd have to think that if there is no Sony Michel, with his 2% target market share, we know that James White is going to be the back in that offense, but maybe Mac Jones does check down a little bit more. And people are always under the assumption that if James White's on the field, it's a passing play. It's not going to be a running play. Maybe they start to disguise their offense a little bit with Damien Harris. And all of a sudden, he's not at a 4% market share of the targets. He's at a 9% market share of the targets. What does that do to his projection all of a sudden? So now we're looking at a situation. We're going to bump Sony Michel down to 0, and we'll be 3% over and have to live with the results of that. All of a sudden, he's running back 15. Now, that's a pretty huge expectation. A 60% market share, 50% of the rushing touchdowns, 9% market share of the target. So even if he's skimmed 20% off those numbers, he's still right around like an over 200-point scorer in half-point PPR. And when I looked at my rankings and I had him firmly in that mix with Kenyon Drake and James Robinson, like the handcuffs with a lot of upside, I feel like he should almost be at a different tier than that. So I had previously ranked him number 95. I want you to help me re-rank him. Like, if we're thinking about where we want to draft him this season, would you have him would you rather have Myles Gaskin or would you rather have Damien Harris?
It's funny. I was just thinking about Gaskin, because Gaskin's going to come out as a similar projection, but with more assumptions needed to get him to where we want him to be. I do think the Patriots offense has the potential to be truly awful, though. So we have to bake that in as well. Like, they may be one of the lower scoring teams in the NFL this year. And granted, they quote unquote upgraded their pass catchers quite a bit this year. They brought in the double tight end set with Johnny Smith and Hunter Henry, Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne. That they've got a real who's who over there. And but I think that it could just be a really bad offense. So trying to figure out what names he belongs close to, I think, I think you're probably talking about a ranking that ends up somewhere in the 70s or 80s overall. Maybe, like think about a guy like Chase Edmonds, for example. Him over in Arizona. I have Damien Harris ranked right behind Chase Edmonds and right ahead of Michael Carter for the Jets right now. And each of those guys, Edmonds is a guy who has a fuzzy role on a good team. Harris has a locked in role on a bad team, and Michael Carter has a fuzzy role on a bad team. So if you kind of like pigeonhole them into that range, like that's kind of where I think you should be considering Damien Harris.
So I have Chase Edmonds ranked at number 71 overall. I have Michael Carter ranked at number 73 overall. It's funny that you mentioned those two names because I actually have them super close. The one good thing is like you're looking for efficiency from Chase Edmonds, and hopefully Kyler doesn't steal every rushing touchdown near the goal line, which I don't think that he's going to do this year. But there is potential upside for him, especially through the receiving game. You chuck on like 5-6 targets a game, and even with James Conner in town, still get between like 8 and 12 carries. That's a very viable running back in both half point and full point PPR. Michael Carter's just sort of a shot in the dark. Like the way that everyone has glommed on to Javonte Williams already, be like, oh, he's going to be the starter in Denver. He's going to have the full-time role. Melvin Gordon is nothing anymore. That's a lot of assumptions to make too. That might be the case, and I'm willing to kind of buy into that over Carter. But if Carter ends up just being like, not even having like a huge share of the snaps with the Jets. If he just plays like 60%, he's the lead and he's involved in passing down situations, Zach Wilson's going to run a bit, which should hurt his overall target share. But I expect the Jets to be so bad on defense that they're just going to run a lot of plays, it would seem. Hopefully they can move the chains a little bit and extend some drives, but there should be enough volume for him. That's why I do think that Damien Harris should go in as well. So do you think you would rather have Michael Carter or Damien Harris, sorry?
I think Damien Harris, and I think the reason why is because of some of these encouraging reports so far out of the Patriots organization that seems like they really trust Damien Harris. And I'd kind of considered Sony Michel to be a real thorn in the side. And I think it's now seeming more and more like it would take something bad to happen to Damien Harris for Sony Michel to be involved in the offense at all. And then obviously Rex Burkhead's out of town. So if Sony Michel's not a huge part of this offense, we're talking about a two-man backfield. That's something we hadn't had in New England in many, many years. And so, I'm more interested there. To me, Michael Carter obviously is the mystery box option, and that's intriguing. And maybe you should be a bit more, prone to hop on rookies. But I do like the fact that we've seen Damien Harris be involved, in different facets of different places on the field. And so if we can get Mac Jones' quarterback situation, Damien Harris now has a floor and a ceiling.
Yeah, if Cam, this is part of the assumption too, and I think that has to be baked into the ranking a little bit is, hey, what if Cam just starts all 17 games? And you're like, oh. If Cam starts all 17 games, that would probably actually mean they're pretty good, wouldn't it?
Yeah, probably so. So that's maybe a good hedge there, is to understand that even the worst case scenario for Damien Harris, which is a Cam Newton season, likely correlates with a really good season for the entire offense. I hadn't considered that. That's a good point.
Yeah, because if Cam is terrible and they're losing, he's getting yanked for Mac Jones immediately. The only way he keeps his job is if he plays well. Then he's stealing rushing touchdowns, but it probably means that they're a higher volume rushing offense anyway. And we've seen just the rushing lanes for running backs, when you have a primary running quarterback, they're gaping. Like you can find these holes and break off chunk plays in large. So maybe that's a bonus for Damien Harris too. So this little mini tier. So I had him as a part of that handcuff tier. I'm going to move him up to the Chase Edmonds, Ronald Jones, Michael Carter tier. That was like a little mini tier that I had after Gaskin and Mostert and Josh Jacobs. I don't think that Harris is up on that level. Although Josh Jacobs could end up being a pretty good comp for him if everything breaks right. But I think I have Josh Jacobs, not necessarily at his floor in terms of his ranking, but like below where his median outcome is, just because I'm not a believer that he'll ever do anything in the passing game.
Yeah, based on where ADP's fallen for Josh Jacobs, I'm just never going to get him there, and so I'm fine with that. Like, you don't want a timeshare running back in a mediocre offense. And granted, the Raiders scored a lot of touchdowns last year, and Josh Jacobs is a big part of that. But overall, like when you add a guy that they paid premium free agency money for, like that in Kenyon Drake, I think that changes everything in that backfield.
Yeah, I think it really changes what the expectation that I remember after week 1 last year against Carolina, everyone's like, oh my God, Josh Jacobs, he had like 4 catches or something. He had the 3 touchdowns as well. It was like, oh my God, he's going to have the most monster season. Everyone who said that he wasn't involved in the receiving game is so stupid. Look at this. And it's like, no, he basically like didn't catch a pass the entire year.
Exactly. Yeah, everybody took their victory lap just a smidge too soon there.
So Edmonds, Ronald Jones, Michael Carter, 71, 72, 73 is where I have them right now. Let's insert Damien Harris in there. So would you go Edmonds or Harris?
I still lean towards Harris there. I kind of think James Conner is going to be the guy in Arizona, and it may suck, and James Conner may not be all that great, and that's all fine. That can all still be true. But as we mentioned earlier, volume is king in fantasy football. So if James Conner is the guy that just keeps Chase Edmonds limited to third downs, then it doesn't matter how good Chase Edmonds is.
So would you go Chase Edmonds or Ronald Jones?
Chase Edmonds.
Okay. Would you go Michael Carter or Ronald Jones?
Michael Carter.
All right. There we are. So that's the move. Maybe I have Ronald Jones overranked, but I just think that he is going to be the guy in that backfield eventually. I mean, is there a guarantee that Fournette even makes this team?
Well, so that was I actually want to ask you about the Bucs backfield, because ever since they signed Gio Bernard this offseason, that is another free agent addition that sort of changed everything, because without Gio Bernard in the picture, you can say that, okay, well, we'll see sort of a split like we saw last year. Like maybe they lean Ronald Jones just a smidge more on the ground, and then Fournette, plenty of groundwork, but the vast majority of the passing game work. And then we saw Fournette just drops all these passes, late in the season last year, and they bring Gio Bernard in. It's like they maybe don't trust Fournette to get it done, but obviously Fournette came through in the clutch last year, playoff Lenny for the win, just sort of left Ronald Jones holding the bag. Now, granted, Jones is a little bit banged up too, but I think Gio Bernard really, really sort of limits the upside potential of Leonard Fournette. And so maybe that means Ronald Jones is the only guy in that backfield who what his role looks like.
Yeah, it's not a backfield that I really want a lot to do with. Like Bernard, actually, I can't imagine ever having to play him. Like, what does my team look like that I'm playing Gio Bernard?
Not a good team, I would say. You better hope that you have your entire starting lineup on bye that week. And then you hope that you get lucky on top of that. Yeah, I don't think Bernard is a guy that you want to target by any means or even put on your team. He's just a guy that makes it really hairy for everybody else.
So looking at the ADPs right now from the last 3 weeks, so I want to use, again, just the most updated information of where these guys are actually going at the moment. Taking a look at it, we have Ronald Jones being drafted as running back number 33, Damian Harris being drafted as running back number 34, and Leonard Fournette being drafted as running back number 35. That's kind of just a weird tier of these guys that we've just primarily been talking about. And Trey Sermon is going at number 29. I still can't figure that out for the life of me. That just seems way too high to me, and we can talk ourselves into the upside as much as we want in that San Francisco backfield, but they legit have like 7 running backs.
Yeah, well, the running back rotation's tightening up at least a little bit. And granted, they brought in some rookies, obviously Trey Sermon, and I actually just fired a tweet off about this a little while ago. Like, I think Raheem Mostert is maybe one of the most slept on guys in this range. Like, to me, he's a guy who's averaging well over 5 yards. I think it's 5.5 yards per carry over the course of his career. Like, phenomenal running back rushing usage. And, he's in an offense that obviously loves to run the ball. And, people sleep on Mostert. Mostert was a 4.3 40 guy and, almost 4.6 40 for Trey Sermon. So I don't understand. Like, the team has put no real draft capital, a 3rd round draft pick in Trey Sermon, and we're acting like they took him in the 1st round. Like, it's a very different situation. I don't think the team owes that much in terms of draft capital to playing Trey Sermon, but we're going to start off the season with Jeff Wilson banged up. He may not be ready for week 1 based on early reports. Obviously, Tevin Coleman is playing for the Jets now. And so, yeah, there's not a whole lot of other options. Wayne Gallman's a part of that offense now, but I don't expect them to feature him in any real way. I think it's Raheem Mostert's backfield. I think we're just overcomplicating this like crazy.
And even let's just take a look at the projections here that you have Raheem Mostert. like the baseline projection for him is 41% of the market share of carries. And even if that ends up being the case, now it does at a 45% rushing TD market share. That is pretty high. That would have him being running back number 19, but only 41% of the carries is pretty low. The big thing here is the Trey Lance part of this, because you live that hedge life in the projections. 50% passing market share for Trey Lance, 50% for Jimmy Garoppolo. But we can play around with this and see what happens if, I don't know, let's say there's a 100% passing market share. Oh, that's a 1%. We probably don't want to do that. We want to go 100% market share for Trey Lance. And now all of a sudden, we're ticking up a little bit, although you'd probably have to think that the rushing share for Trey Lance goes from like 12% to what, like 17, 18%?
Yeah, I was thinking 18% there. Mm-hmm.
So let's change that to 18%. All of a sudden we see, and let's take a few away from Mostert in that situation. We'll put him at 38%. 38.1%. Sure, that works out fine. Then we're at 101. So Trey Lance is looking good all of a sudden with his QB number 14 overall is what he gets bumped up to in this situation. And that's even with 6 yards per carry and a very high rush rate. So the rushing rate for this team overall really helps out. But even if we drop Mostert with Trey Lance in, maybe it takes away from the market share of rushing touchdowns. Should we adjust those at all, do you think?
It could, yeah. I think maybe you bump that touchdown market share down to maybe 40 there for Mostert, and that per my number gets him to running back 21, and so yeah, it's still well paying off current ADP.
Yeah, so if we just adjust him down with Trey Lance and giving him more of a share, and a 39% touchdown rate sounds a little bit better to me, because a lot of it really depends on what happens with Jeff Wilson, because if he plays, his rushing market share for touchdowns is going to be like 89% or something stupid like that, because that's just what they do. And then, Kyle Juszczyk, or Jerzerick, as we call him on this show, because we can't read or spell or pronounce names properly. But Juszczyk, he's going to have his 3 rushing touchdowns somehow. But it's really the Trey Lance situation, which I think helps overall the rushing of this team in general. I think you'll see more yardage for someone like Raheem Mostert. But now we enter this Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen situation where is the quarterback going to be the one who's scoring all the touchdowns? But even in that scenario, a 38% market share of the rushing attempts all year long, 39% of the rushing touchdowns on this team, a 7% market share of targets. That seems, maybe that's on the high end, but that's not crazy by any means. That still makes him running back number 22 for the season. And just looking at where he's going in drafts right now, it is running back number 31 overall after Trey Sermon, and that's at pick number 82 in drafts. So that dead range that you talked about between 50 and 100 for running backs is true. There is a dead range, but at the back end of that, that's probably when you start start reinvesting back into running backs, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And, this guy's going far enough back where you don't need him to be capturing any type of huge ceiling. And you obviously know that if you remove some of these other running backs from the picture, there's obvious path to him, taking over as a lead back and running away with it on extreme efficiency. That's, you'll see a yards per carry number beside Raheem Mostert that's a little bit gaudy, 5.4 yards per carry. That's not a number we typically see projected for a running back. Occasionally you'll see a player land on it, but Mostert's had a long enough track history of being a hyper efficient runner that we can leave that there. So he's even a guy that doesn't need 20 carries a game to pay off.
No, and if he's going to get 20 carries per game, then all of a sudden his market share isn't going to be 38%. It's going to be 60%. Then you can just go manually adjust that number down. It's a lot like the Lamar Miller situation when he was in Miami, where he basically put up the same numbers on 10 carries a game in Miami as he did in 20 carries a game in Houston, because his efficiency went down so much. So if you can project in 10 to 15 carries a game, sometimes on the high end, sometimes on the low end for Mostert, but he stays around that efficiency number. But if you did want to put him in at 65% market share, you'd probably just adjust his yards per carry down to 4.5 or something like that and see what the numbers put out for you.
Yep, exactly. So there's a number of ways that you can skin the same cat, but overall get you to the same outcome.
So Final thing I wanted to talk about was this QB stuff. So we talked about if Mac Jones is the starter, if we just did some projections if Trey Lance is the starter, Justin Fields, we can talk about him as well. Because you had mentioned Jalen Hurts, who it seems like anyone who runs numbers or understands how fantasy scoring works at the quarterback position is really in love with. But I think we all admit that there's massive downside to someone like Jalen Hurts if he's just not all that great. I think that his floor will be excellent, but like I have him right now as quarterback number 8 overall. Like that's where I would want to take him because I think that he is one of the few quarterbacks in the running this year to be QB1. And everyone will scoff at that, but if you just look at how fantasy quarterbacks score points, he does it the right way, but so does Zach Wilson, so does Trey Lance, so does Justin Fields, so does Joe Burrow if we can get him running a little bit. Trevor Lawrence is one that it's funny because we want to talk about the super late guys who we don't know whether they're starting or not, but Trevor Lawrence runs too. Like Trevor Lawrence, is there a path for any of these guys to be a top 5 quarterback if they start day 1 this year?
Yeah, I think certainly for Jalen Hurts, there's a path towards top 5. Trevor Lawrence, I'd have a little bit tougher time seeing getting there in year 1. He is definitely a mobile quarterback. Let's not forget that. And but I just still don't know if the ceiling is there for Trevor Lawrence, but he is a phenomenal prospect. Let's not forget that people have been tanking for 2 or 3 years, knowing that Trevor Lawrence was coming through the pipeline in 2021. Ultimately, he ends up with Jacksonville. So yeah, I think there's plenty of reason to want him, especially in a best ball format where you're going to want to roster at least 2 quarterbacks, or even in a super flex league too, but not a guy I'm super targeting for single quarterback redraft. But I am interested in some of those guys that we don't know whether are going to be starters or not, and Justin Fields and Trey Lance, specifically Lance. Like I think Lance has much more of a known rushing history than Fields or Lawrence or Wilson for that matter. So I think we could project some pretty strong rushing usage. And that's usually the thing in projections that we can feel much more solid about is knowing where that rushing volume is coming from. And that's why Jalen Hurts pops so much, is because he's going to get a quarter of the team's rush attempts in this offense. No doubt about it, unless the team trades for Deshaun Watson or something crazy like that happens. But you obviously can't project for that. I think Trey Lance definitely has top 5 potential should he end up getting 16 games worth of start or 17 games worth of starts.
Yeah, I mean, even 16 games worth of starts. I'd take the hit week 1 and play someone else and have Trey Lance for the next 16 games. I think that would be fine. Looking at their ADPs right now, Jalen Hurts is QB 9 off the board at pick number 87. Like he's going a spot after Aaron Rodgers. I know it seems sacrilegious and people who don't understand fantasy wouldn't make sense of it, but I'd rather have Jalen Hurts than Aaron Rodgers. I just would. Because if Jalen Hurts sucks, I can go pick up someone who has like 85% of the numbers of Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, exactly. And especially if you're drafting right now and don't know whether Aaron Rodgers is going to be hosting Jeopardy or throwing footballs this fall, it can be really tough to place a whole lot of trust in Aaron Rodgers even suiting up. So you've got to factor in some sort of risk associated with that as a part of his decision there. So yeah, definitely like Jalen Hurts in that situation. And, as we're talking about rumors and possible situations and stuff, like Deshaun Watson's a guy who's really interesting to keep an eye on, especially if you're doing your best ball drafts and things like that right now, because Watson is a guy that we know if he puts on his uniform is probably going to be a candidate to put up top 5 numbers. And whether he's playing behind that terrible Houston team or playing in Philly or playing for whoever, Denver, whoever else, like I think he's super intriguing as like a super late round best ball pick right now.
Yeah, even in season long, if you're doing early drafts and you have an extended bench or just don't care about something, I mean, the worst case scenario is you draft him in the last round, just wait till the beginning of the season if he's not traded or put on the exemption list or whatever it might be, because even if he's traded, doesn't mean he's necessarily going to play this year, depending on what his potential suspension might be, that just drop him before week 1. Like, don't draft a kicker, draft Deshaun Watson, then pick up a kicker week 1 if nothing has happened yet.
Exactly. Or swap him out for that handcuff running back that, you could just as easily get after week 1 or whatever. Like, I mean, there's a lot of options there. So be smart with the way you're putting your roster together. Have some guys in there that have ceilings. Like there's no need, for you to be rostering Sam Darnold. Like, he's not going to help you this year. Take a flyer on a guy like Watson, who, you can absolutely cut bait on before week one. And Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston are two perfect examples of that too. To me, there's a lot of really intriguing quarterback battles going on, and Taysom and Jameis is like, either one of those guys is going to put up fantasy points this season. You just don't know who it is just yet. So pick one and hold them on the end of your bench until it's time to start week one, and you'll know who the starter is then.
So it looks like the elite level, Jalen Hurts, like I said, quarterback number 10. For reference, Trey Lance is going quarterback number 18, 145 overall. So they're basically like last round picks at this point. Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Daniel Jones, I'll throw into that mix because he runs as well. And that's really what I'm looking for here. Deshaun Watson, number 28. Zach Wilson, number 29. Taysom Hill and Jameis, 27 and 31. The only other one I kind of wanted to mention as a part of this, I guess the two. One, we laid out that scenario where Cam Newton starts all year. If he starts all year, he's going to be a good fantasy quarterback.
Absolutely. Like, we've rarely seen Cam Newton be a bad fantasy quarterback. We've seen him play some bad football, but we've not seen him be a bad fantasy quarterback. When he's out there, like, I mean, you feel like he's a favorite to score a rushing touchdown. And then, he struggled in the air last year, but hopefully with those weapons upgrades coming this year. And people forget that the Patriots also had like a record high number of people who went on the COVID exempt list last year and chose not to play. They'll be better this year in New England. So yeah, a promising situation for Cam Newton, where one where he starts all season long, is a really good fantasy situation.
All right, that will do it on the Pat Mayo Experience picks for rankings 50 to 100. You can find the entire list in the comment section and description of this show, and you can find them up on DraftKingsPlaybook.com. Check out my top 50 with Jake Seeley, where I went through and we navigated the rankings. This was more projection based and trying to figure out some of those mid guys that, I mean, Justin, like the 6th, 7th, 8th round, like if you can find one good player, like usually when you go back and look at your drafts at the end of the year and look at the 5, 6, 7, 8 round, the teams that win are the teams that find two guys who were good from that range.
Yeah, you hear people talk about league winners, and to me, league winners often come from two different places. One is like the one guy who you had to have in the first round to win your league last year. And maybe that was like Alvin Kamara last year. Like you just needed him, or you maybe needed Derrick Henry, one of those two types of guys. Like a really small number of guys that you just had to have in the first round. And then the next is those groups of guys that are going in the middle rounds who all of a sudden launch their way into being low-end wide receiver ones or low-end running back ones that round out your roster and just make you super strong. So, finding guys who are going to fall into early volume, I think is a good shortcut. And hopefully that projection builder tool over on runthesims.com can help folks get there.
All right, can you tell everyone else what is to be expected to come from runthesims.com? Because the entire site is free right now, so if people want to go check it out, like for the optimizer, you have week 1 from last year loaded in, so people can go try it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we've got a lot of stuff that's already up and available. I will say, if you're thinking about joining, go ahead and get you a free account, but I would go ahead and sign up immediately, because on July 31st at midnight for August 1st, we're going to increase the price by $50. So hop on in there, join the Founders Club, get that discount. That's $199 for the entire NFL season. If you go to runthesims.com/Mayo, we've got some even better hookups for you over there too. So go check that out. But yeah, we've got projections. And then the big thing that sets Run the Sims apart from other places is we lean on simulations. What we do is, during the week of the NFL seasons, we're going to run every game out. Like, think about a Madden simulation, like where at the end of the game, you get a box score for every player. We do that, and we do it 10,000 times for every single game. And then we get some really cool information off of that we share with you. And we make it super easy. It's like a super nerdy, complicated process that's made super easy and informative and easy to use. So go on over there, runthesims.com/Mayo.
Yes, and the biggest thing for me, why I wanted to team up with Justin to do this, is just how much fun that I have on a site like Fantasy National, where I can go and plug in what I think is going to happen, and the site can give me my projections of what I think is going to happen. This is going to be that for the NFL, and don't be afraid to check out the Advanced Stats Hub, by the way. Go play around in there, because, Justin, that's the super underrated part of the site that I feel like we're not talking about enough.
That's true. You are 100% right. I'd never remember to mention the Stats Hub, and it's maybe one of the more informative places you can go because it gets you some look at some numbers that aren't as readily accessible. Things such as expected points added or win probability added, and you can really sort of turn the screws on trying to get to the bottom of whether a player is any good or not by digging into those numbers. You can get really good understandings of what a fair baseline is for any of these players by going in there looking at those numbers. And then obviously we're keeping track of, target market shares, rushing market shares, and that sort of thing. You'll get that displayed out all in a really, pretty easy to use visualization. And it's fun. Just go in there and, run some queries and find out some answers to questions you have. To me, it's always cool to go in and learn more about these players.
Yeah, well, you can select the weeks that you want. You can go by game if you want to check it out to see the offensive win probability. You can look at the analytics by the season, the analytics by team, and sort it and customize it any way that you want. And this is just so hard to find available. And is this going to be free all year long?
Yeah, well, what do you think, Pat? Should we leave it free? I say we just leave it free.
I think that we leave it free. The people who want to go check this out on a weekly basis can go check this out and make their process much easier on themselves to go find exactly what they want. I think I'm good with that.
All right, let's roll with it then. Yeah, it's been great. Everybody's really loved it who's checked it out so far. I say when you launch a site like this, like we've done, you never really know what's going to break, and so far nothing's breaking, and everybody's happy. Everything's great, Pat. So head on over there today, and it's been a lot of fun so far.
All right, at Justin Freeman 18 on Twitter to check him out, one of the best DraftKings Showdown players in the world, so you might want to follow him for that. Also, sub to Mayo Media Network and become a founding member at runthesims.com/Mayo to get that discount, lock in your price for life right now, or just go check out the site for free by signing up to see if it's something that you might be into for this season. Remember to get into that cash giveaway draw as well. Just go down in the description or search Fantasy Football Picks and Bets on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to it. Leave a 5-star review, something you enjoy about the show, Twitter handle, email, and you're in a draw for the cash giveaways. The more reviews that we get, the higher that prize pool is going to be for the cash giveaways. So right now, it's at $500 in the kitty. We get a few more, let's say 25 more reviews. Maybe we'll pump that up to $1,000 for me to give to you out there. So please go check that out now. Check out the show, too. I mean, the show is quite good. And it's going to be coming at you fast and furious. A different vibe from the Pat Mayo experience, but still all the fantasy football news that you need. Smash the like on the way out, and that'll do it for me. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!